The rain fell like judgment on Seoul's streets, each drop carrying the weight of 5 years' worth of secrets. Seo Yuna pressed her face against the grimy window of the bus, watching the city blur past in streaks of neon and shadow. Her reflection stared back, 22 years old, unremarkable in her thrift store coat, a girl who had perfected the art of being invisible. But ghosts, she had learned, moved differently through the world than the living. "Next stop, Hanyang University," the driver announced, his voice cutting through her reverie. Yuna's fingers tightened around the strap of her second-hand bag, feeling the weight of forged documents and carefully crafted lies that had bought her this new life. 5 years ago, Seo Yuna had died in a car accident that made national headlines. Today, Kim Mi-rae would walk into business school to begin her final semester. The flashback hit without warning, as they always did. Rain on a windshield. Her mother's voice, urgent and afraid. "They know about the documents, Yuna. We have to run." The screech of brakes, the taste of blood, her mother's hand going limp in hers. Then nothing but white hospital lights and the careful voice of Dr. Huang explaining how Kim Mi-rae had been found near the wreckage, a Jane Doe with no memory and no family to claim her. "But you're alive," Dr. Huang had whispered during one of their secret meetings. "Your mother's network saved you. Now you have to decide what to do with that gift." Yuna shook herself back to the present as the university gates came into view. Hanyang's business school rose like a monument to corporate power, its glass facade reflecting the morning sun like armor. She had spent 3 years here, watching the children of Korea's elite play at learning while their families shaped the country's future. Soon, she would graduate with honors that meant nothing, armed with knowledge too. Hat would destroy everything. The corporate ethics classroom buzzed with the lazy energy of students who had never questioned where their comfort came from. Yuna slipped into her usual seat in the back, notebook open, expression carefully neutral. She had learned to make herself forgettable, not invisible, which would attract attention, but unremarkable enough that people's eyes slid past her without stopping. "All right, settle down," Professor Lim called out. "Today, we're forming groups for your final project on corporate social responsibility. I want diverse perspectives, so no clustering with your usual crowds." That's when she first saw him. Kim Tae-hyun walked into the classroom 15 minutes late, his hair still damp from what was probably an expensive gym session. He moved with the unconscious confidence of someone who had never doubted his place in the world, apologizing to the professor with a charming smile that said he knew he'd be forgiven. "Mr. Kim, you'll be in Group 4 with Ms. Park, Mr. Lee, and—" Professor Lim's eyes scanned the room, landing on Yuna. "Ms. Kim Mi-rae." Their eyes met across the classroom, and Yuna felt something dangerous flutter in her chest. Taehyun's gaze lingered on her face with curious interest, as if trying to solve a puzzle he couldn't quite identify. She looked away quickly, but not before noting the expensive watch on his wrist, the subtle designer labels that marked him as exactly the kind of person she had sworn to destroy. "Well, this should be interesting," Park Min-ju said as she approached their assigned table, her Chanel bag worth more than most people's monthly rent. Corporate social responsibility from the corporate heirs themselves. The irony is delicious. Min-ju was everything Yuna pretended not to be. Effortlessly elegant, connected, born into the kind of wealth that bought not just things but possibilities. Her father's shipping empire controlled half the cargo moving through Busan's ports, and she wore that power like perfume. "I think we should focus on supply chain ethics," Yuna said quietly, opening her notebook. "Interview workers who've been affected by corporate cost-cutting measures." Taehyun leaned forward, intrigued. "That's unexpectedly practical? Most groups just analyze existing reports." "Real people make better subjects than spreadsheets," Yuna replied, meeting his gaze steadily. For a moment, she forgot to be careful, letting him see the steel beneath her quiet exterior. "I like her," Min-ju announced with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "She's got fire under all that modesty." The weeks that followed became a careful dance of attraction and deception. Yuna found herself looking forward to their group meetings, drawn to the glimpses of genuine thoughtfulness that Taehyun showed when he forgot to perform his princely role. He asked questions about her research with real curiosity, listened to her ideas without the patronizing smile she expected from someone of his background. "You know," he said one evening as they worked late in the library, "you see things differently than most people here. Where did you grow up?" The question was casual, but Yuna felt the familiar chill of being examined too closely. "Daegu," she lied smoothly. "My parents run a small restaurant. Nothing special." "Everything about you is special," he said quietly, then seemed surprised by his own words. "I mean, your perspective. It's refreshing." Yuna's heart hammered against her ribs, but she kept her expression neutral. "Maybe that's because I actually listen to people instead of just waiting for my turn to talk." Hell, laughed. A real sound that made her chest ache. Ouch, fair point. It was during their third week of working together that Detective Park made contact. Yuna was leaving her part-time job at the convenience store when a middle-aged man in a rumpled coat approached her. "Kim Mirai," he said, but the way he pronounced it made her skin crawl with recognition. "We need to talk." They met in a 24-hour diner in Hongdae, the kind of place where nobody asked questions and the coffee was strong enough to keep secrets awake. Detective Park Sang-ho looked like every corrupt cop from every crime drama, but his eyes held the exhaustion of a man who had seen too much. "Your mother saved my daughter's life," he said without preamble, sliding a manila envelope across the sticky table. "Exposed the factory that was poisoning her school's water supply. I've been waiting 5 years to return the favor." Yuna's hands trembled as she opened the envelope. Bank records, shipping manifests, meeting notes, all bearing her father's signature, all documenting weapons sales to countries under international sanctions. "This is just the beginning," Park continued. "Your father's network goes deeper than you know. Judges, prosecutors, half the National Assembly. But every fortress has weak points." "Why help me?" Yuna asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Park's smile was bitter. "Because some sins don't wash clean, no matter how much money you throw at them. Your mother believed the truth mattered more than comfort. Maybe it's time I tried believing that too." Walking back to her tiny studio apartment that night, Yuna felt the full weight of her double life pressing down on her shoulders. In one world, she was Kim Mirai, the scholarship student who made Kim Taehyun laugh and forgot to be careful around his searching gaze. In the other, she was Seo Yuna, the ghost who would bring down her father's empire, even if it destroyed her in the process. She stood in front of her bathroom mirror, studying the small scar along her jawline that she covered with makeup every morning. The reminder of who she really was, what she had survived, what she owed to the dead. "They think a dead girl can't hurt them," she whispered to her reflection. "But ghosts have nothing left to lose." Outside her window, Seoul glittered like scattered diamonds, beautiful and cold and full of secrets. Tomorrow she would sit next to Taehyun in class and pretend her heart didn't race when he smiled. Tomorrow she would be Kim Mirai, the girl who believed in justice and second chances. But tonight, she was Seo Yuna, and she had work to do. Spring arrived at Hanyang University like a promise Seoul wasn't sure it could keep. Cherry blossoms lined the walkways in delicate pink clouds, and the air hummed with the restless energy of young hearts discovering themselves. Yuna watched it all from behind her carefully constructed walls, knowing that seasons changed, but ghosts remained the same. "You're distracted," Taehyun observed during their study session in the library's quiet corner. 3 months of working together had created an intimacy she hadn't planned for, the way he knew she preferred it. At the back tables, how she unconsciously bit her lip when concentrating, the soft way she smiled when she thought no one was watching. "Just thinking about the presentation," she lied, closing her laptop. Their corporate ethics project had become something more complex than either had expected. A genuine investigation into labor practices that made their professors uncomfortable and their classmates whisper. "It's good work," he said, leaning closer to look at her screen. She caught his scent, expensive cologne mixed with something uniquely him that made her stupid heart skip. "You found things our professors probably wish we hadn't." "Truth has a way of being inconvenient," Yuna replied, hating how natural it felt to sit this close to him, to pretend they were just two students falling in love instead of predator and prey. Is that why you chose me? The question came out of nowhere, vulnerable and uncertain. For the project, I mean, because you knew I'd have access to information others wouldn't? Yuna met his gaze, seeing genuine insecurity there. Kim Tae-hyun, the golden prince of Korean society, was asking if she was using him. The irony would have been funny if it didn't feel like drowning. I chose you because you asked questions instead of just accepting answers, she said truthfully. That's rarer than you think. Something shifted in his expression, a door opening that she hadn't expected. My friends think I'm crazy for spending so much time on this project. Minju says I'm becoming too intense. Minju. The name hung between them like a blade. Yuna had watched their relationship develop over the semester, study dates that turned into dinner dates, the easy way Minju touched his arm when she laughed, how perfectly she fit into his world of charity galas and family expectations. Maybe she's right, Yuna said carefully. This isn't your world, Taehyun. Corporate responsibility, workers' rights. You don't have to care about these things. But I do care. His voice was fierce, surprising them both. Since we started this project, since I started seeing things through your eyes, I can't go back to not knowing. Does that make sense? It made perfect, terrible sense. Yuna felt her carefully constructed armor cracking, letting in light that had no business being there. Sometimes ignorance is safer. Safer for who? The question lingered as Minju appeared at their table, elegant as always in her designer blazer and perfectly applied lipstick. There you are, she said, settling next to Taehyun with practiced grace. I've been looking everywhere. We were just finishing up, Yuna said, already packing her things. Actually, Minju's voice carried a note Yuna couldn't identify. I wanted to talk to both of you about the presentation tomorrow. They found themselves in the campus coffee shop, an unlikely triangle of tension and unspoken truths. Minju ordered something complicated and expensive, while Yuna stuck to black coffee that tasted like her childhood, bitter and strong enough to keep you awake through anything. I've been researching your sources, Minju said without preamble, her eyes fixed on Yuna. Some of them are interesting. Whistleblowers, former employees who sued their companies, people with axes to grind. People with stories to tell, Yuna corrected, feeling the familiar chill of being examined too closely. Stories, yes, but whose version of the truth? Minju's smile was sharp as glass. I'm not criticizing. I just think we should be careful about appearing too activist. Some of our professors have corporate consulting contracts. Taehyun looked between them, sensing undercurrents he couldn't name. The research is solid, Minju. We verified everything through multiple sources. Of course you did. Minju's hand found his arm, a gesture of possession disguised as affection. You're both so thorough, so passionate about justice. The word dripped with subtle mockery, and Yuna felt something cold and familiar settle in her chest. This was how it always started, the casual dismissal, the suggestion that caring about fairness was somehow naive or inappropriate. That evening, Yuna walked alone through the campus gardens, cherry blossoms falling like snow in the spring air. She should have been preparing for their presentation, should have been focused on maintaining her cover story. Instead, she found herself thinking about the way Taehyun's eyes lit up when he talked about changing the world, the gentle way he'd helped an elderly janitor pick up scattered papers that afternoon. You're falling for him, she whispered to the empty air, the admission tasting like betrayal. You stupid, stupid girl. Her phone buzzed with a text from Detective Park. New intel. Meet tomorrow after your presentation. Big development. The presentation went better than expected. Their professor seemed genuinely impressed by the depth of their research, and several classmates asked thoughtful questions. But Yuna noticed the way Minju deflected the more challenging points, steering the discussion towards safer corporate charitable initiatives instead of systemic reform. Well done, Taehyun said afterward, his smile warm with shared accomplishment. I think we actually changed some minds today. Maybe, Yuna replied, watching Minju approach with a group of their wealthy classmates. Or maybe we just made them better at hiding their indifference. You're so cynical sometimes, he laughed, but there was something fond in his voice that made her chest ache. Don't you believe people can change? Before she could answer, Minju was there, sliding her arm through Taehyun's with practiced ease. Celebration dinner? My treat. I know a place in Gangnam that just opened. Yoona watched them leave together, perfect in their shared understanding of privilege and possibility. She stood alone in the empty classroom, surrounded by the ghosts of words that couldn't be taken back and feelings that had no safe place to exist. The meeting with Detective Park that night brought news that changed everything. Sitting in their usual diner, he spread new documents across the table, shipping records, payment transfers, communication logs that painted a clear picture of her father's criminal network. We're close, he said, his voice tight with exhaustion and hope. Another month, maybe 2, and we'll have enough to bring charges. Are you ready for what comes next? Yoona stared at the evidence, thinking about Taehyun's laugh, about the way he looked at her when he thought she wasn't watching, about the impossible dream of being Kim Mirai forever. I'm ready, she lied. But fate, as always, had other plans. 3 days later, she found herself on the library rooftop as the sun set over Seoul, her heart hammering with a confession she knew would destroy everything. Taehyun stood silhouetted against the golden sky, beautiful and untouchable as a prince from a fairy tale she had no business believing in. There's something I need to tell you, she began, her carefully planned words dissolving into raw honesty. These past months, working with you, getting to know who you really are, I think I've fallen in love with you. The silence stretched between them, heavy with possibility and dread. She watched him process her words, saw the conflict in his eyes as duty warred with something that might have been affection. Yoona, he said finally, and her real name on his lips felt like a gift and a curse. You're amazing, really. But we want different things. You want to change the world, to fight these battles that... He paused, searching for words that wouldn't sound completely dismissive. That what? Her voice was steady, but she felt like she was bleeding from wounds no one could see. I'm going to inherit responsibilities. I need someone who understands that world, who can be a partner in it. Minju and I, we make sense together. We want the same future. And what future is that? The question came out sharper than she intended. One where we work within the system to make incremental changes, where we don't tear everything down just to prove a point. His voice carried the patient tone of someone explaining reality to a child. You'd burn it all down if you could. The words hung in the air like a judgment, like a prophecy, like the truth neither of them was ready to face. Then maybe it deserves to burn, she whispered. Something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, fear, or perhaps recognition of the steel beneath her softness. But then his phone buzzed with a text from Minju, and the moment shattered like glass. I'm sorry, he said, and she could hear the genuine regret in his voice. You deserve someone who can love you the way you love, completely, without reservations. That's just not who I am. Yoona nodded, managed a smile that felt like broken glass in her chest, and walked away with her dignity intact. But alone in her apartment that night, surrounded by the evidence of her false life and her real mission, she finally understood what her mother had tried to tell her before she died. Love was a luxury ghosts couldn't afford, and Seo Yoona had been dead for 5 years. The tears she cried that night weren't just for Taehyun's rejection, but for the girl she might have been, the love she might have known if circumstances had been different. But by morning, Kim Mirai was gone, and only the ghost remained. It was time to finish what she had started. The transformation began with ritual. Yoona sat in her cramped bathroom at 3 a.m., scissors in her hand, watching 5 years of carefully maintained Kim Mirai fall to the floor in dark strands. The Earl who had loved Kim Taehyun was dying, and from her ashes, something far more dangerous would emerge. Love made me weak, she whispered to her reflection, studying the sharp angles of her face that no longer needed to hide behind softness. Hate makes me unstoppable. Thank you for teaching me the difference. The mirror showed her what she had always been beneath the performance. Her father's daughter, carved from the same ruthless stone. The realization should have horrified her. Instead, it felt like coming home. Detective Park found her changed when they met 3 days later. Gone was the hesitant scholarship student. In her place sat a woman who moved with predatory precision, her questions cutting straight to the heart of every weakness in her father's network. "You're different," he observed, sliding new documents across the diner table. "What happened?" "I remembered who I'm supposed to be," Yuna replied, scanning shipping manifests with clinical detachment. "These weapons shipments to Myanmar, they're using dummy corporations registered in the Cayman Islands. My father always was predictable in his creativity." Park's eyebrows rose. "How could you possibly know that?" "Because I helped him design the system when I was 15. The admission fell from her lips like poison. "He called it educational, teaching his heir the family business from every angle." The evidence spread before them painted a picture of systematic corruption that reached into every corner of Korean society. Arms deals disguised as construction equipment, bribes filtered through charitable foundations, judges and prosecutors bought with their children's education funds. Her father hadn't just built a criminal empire, he had woven it into the fabric of legitimate power until it became impossible to separate. "We need something undeniable," Park said, his fingers tapping nervously against his coffee cup. "Something that can't be dismissed or buried." Yuna studied the documents with the cold calculation she had inherited along with her father's eyes. "Then we get him to confess, on record." "How?" A smile touched her lips, sharp enough to cut glass. "By reminding him that dead daughters make excellent recording devices." The plan required her to step closer to the edge of discovery than she had dared in 5 years. Using skills learned in her father's shadow, she hacked into CO Industries' internal communications system, planting surveillance software that would capture every email, every phone call, every whispered conversation in the executive offices. But infiltrating the digital network wasn't enough. She needed physical access to the building, needed to plant recording devices in her father's private office where the real decisions were made. The security system was one she had helped design as a teenager, back when Seo Jinhwan still believed his daughter would inherit his empire legitimately. "The system has a weakness," her father had told her once, never imagining she would use that lesson against him. "The key is knowing where to look." She found her weakness in young Secretary Kim, her father's longtime assistant who had watched Yuna grow up and grieved her supposed death. A woman whose own daughter had been killed in a factory accident that CO Industries had covered up for insurance purposes. The approach required delicate timing. Yuna waited outside Secretary Kim's apartment building on a rainy Thursday evening, wearing clothes that echoed her teenage style just enough to trigger recognition. When the older woman emerged from the subway, umbrella raised against the sole drizzle, Yuna stepped into the light. "Hello, Aunt Kim," she said softly, using the honorific she had called the woman in childhood. Secretary Kim's umbrella fell from nerveless fingers, clattering to the wet pavement. "Yuna-ya?" The pet name emerged as a broken whisper. "But you died." "I survived, and I need your help to make sure my father pays for what he's done. To my mother, to your daughter, to everyone." The meeting that followed in Secretary Kim's small apartment was a masterclass in emotional manipulation that would have made her father proud. Yuna provided just enough truth to be believable: the staged accident, the years in hiding, the evidence she had gathered, while carefully omitting her own role in the network's creation. "He killed them both," Yuna said, letting tears she had learned to summon on command slide down her cheeks. "My mother tried to expose the weapons dealing, and he had her murdered. Your Suman died because he cut safety corners to increase profits. How many more have to die for his greed?" Secretary Kim's hands shook as she looked at photographs of factory workers injured by faulty equipment, their medical bills unpaid, their families abandoned. "What do you need?" "Access, just once. 30 minutes in his office to plant recording devices, that's all." 3 weeks later, Yuna walked through the halls of CO Industries for the first time in 5 years, wearing a janitor's uniform and carrying cleaning supplies that concealed state-of-the-art surveillance equipment. The building felt like a mausoleum of her childhood, every corner holding memories of the girl who had once believed her father was a hero. His office remained unchanged. The same mahogany desk where she had done homework, the same family photo on the credenza that now felt like mockery. She worked quickly, placing microcameras and audio devices with the precision of someone who knew exactly how her father's paranoia functioned. It was while planting the final device behind his computer monitor that she heard footsteps in the outer office. Secretary Kim's voice, nervous and too loud. "Sir, you're early. The cleaning crew is still..." "Since when do we need advance notice to enter our own building?" Her father's voice cut through the walls like a blade, and Yuna felt 5 years of careful planning threaten to crumble in an instant. She had 30 seconds before he reached the door. The window was 40 floors up. The desk offered no concealment. There was only one option left, one that would require her to become the daughter he had trained her to be. When Seo Jinhwan entered his office, he found it empty except for the lingering scent of industrial cleaner and something else, something familiar that made his hand freeze on the light switch. "Sir?" Secretary Kim appeared behind him, her face professionally blank despite the terror in her eyes. "Is everything all right?" He studied the room with the paranoid attention of a man who had made too many enemies but found nothing out of place. Still, the feeling lingered, the sense of being watched by ghosts. Meanwhile, Minju's investigation was bearing fruit of its own. What had started as idle curiosity about Kim Mirai's background had evolved into something more serious when she noticed inconsistencies in her story. The scholarship records didn't match the financial aid database. The Daegu restaurant her supposed parents ran had never existed. Most troubling of all, Kim Mirai had no digital footprint before age 18, as if she had simply materialized fully formed. "You're becoming obsessed," Taehyun said when she presented him with her findings. They were in his family's penthouse, floor-to-ceiling windows offering a view of Seoul that spoke of power and permanence. "Why does it matter where she came from?" "Because people don't just appear out of nowhere," Minju replied, spreading documents across his coffee table. "And people with nothing to hide don't work this hard to stay invisible." Taehyun picked up a photograph. Yuna's student ID, her expression carefully neutral, her eyes holding secrets he was only beginning to recognize. Maybe she has good reasons for privacy. Or maybe she's dangerous. Minju's voice carried an edge he had never heard before. "Think about it, Taehyun. She appears in our program with impossible insights into corporate malfeasance. She knows things about supply chains and financial structures that most graduate students couldn't access. And she asks questions that make professors uncomfortable." The seeds of doubt, once planted, grew quickly. Taehyun found himself remembering moments that had seemed charming at the time but now felt calculated. The way Yuna always deflected personal questions, her mysterious part-time job that kept her out until all hours, the fact that she had never once invited him to her apartment. But it was the recording device that changed everything. Hidden in Seo Jinhwan's office, it captured a late-night phone call that would destroy dozens of lives and topple governments. "The Myanmar shipment needs to be accelerated," her father's voice, tired and irritated. "The generals are getting impatient, and we can't afford to lose that contract." "What about the UN sanctions?" came the reply. "What about them? We've been circumventing international law for decades. A few more weapons to a few more dictators won't make headlines as long as we're careful about the paper trail." The conversation continued for 20 minutes, detailing bribes, shell companies, and the systematic murder of journalists who had gotten too close to the truth. By the time it ended, Yuna had enough evidence to bring down not just her father, but half, the Korean government. That night, she sat in her apartment listening to her father's voice confess to crimes that had shaped her entire life. The girl who had once loved him, who had believed in his righteousness, felt like a stranger from another lifetime. Now there was only the mission, cold and pure as winter steel. Her phone buzzed with a text from Taehyun. "We need to talk. I know who you are." Yuna stared at the message, feeling the walls of her carefully constructed world beginning to crack. Outside her window, Seoul glittered with the lights of 8 million people living their ordinary lives, unaware that tomorrow would bring revelations that would change everything. She typed back, "No, you don't, but you're about to." The game was ending. Soon, the whole world would know what ghosts could accomplish when they stopped pretending to be alive. The press conference was scheduled for 10 a.m. on a Tuesday that would fracture Seoul's power structure like an earthquake. Yuna stood before the bathroom mirror in her hotel suite, adjusting the collar of her black Armani suit, the same designer her father preferred, a deliberate provocation wrapped in silk and steel. Today, Seo Yuna would rise from the dead, and Kim Mirae would be buried forever. "This is reporter Kim Ji-soo with breaking news," the television announced as her phone rang with the confirmation she had been waiting for. "The Seoul Metropolitan Police have issued arrest warrants for Seo Jin-hwan, CEO of Seo Industries, and 12 associates in connection with illegal arms trafficking and money laundering charges." Detective Park's voice was tight with exhaustion and triumph when she answered. "It's done. Your father was arrested an hour ago. The raid on Seo Industries is underway." "And the media package?" "Delivered to every major news outlet in the country. They'll have the story within the hour." He paused, and she could hear the weight of 5 years planning in his silence. "Are you ready for what comes next?" Yuna watched her reflection straighten, watched Kim Mirae disappear into the steel-spined woman who had always been lurking beneath the surface. "I've been ready since I was 17. The first news van arrived outside Hanyang University at 11:30 a.m., followed by a dozen more as the story broke across every channel simultaneously. "Dead heiress alive. Seo Yuna surfaces after 5 years." The headline screamed in fonts large enough to be read from space, and within hours, her carefully constructed anonymity evaporated like morning mist. Taehyun saw the news while eating lunch in the student center, his chopsticks frozen halfway to his mouth, as Kim Mirae's university ID photo appeared on screen beside archived footage of the Seo family's tragic car accident. The reporter's voice felt distant and unreal. Sources confirm that Seo Yuna, presumed dead since 2018, has been living under an assumed identity while gathering evidence against her father's criminal organization. "Holy shit," his friend Jong-suk breathed. "Isn't that the girl from your ethics project? The quiet one who asked all those weird questions about corporate accountability?" But Taehyun was already running, his mind reeling with implications that felt like physical blows. Every conversation they'd shared, every moment of connection, every tie. She had looked at him with those knowing eyes. It had all been performance. She had been watching him, studying him, probably laughing at how easily he'd been manipulated. He found her in the university library, sitting at their usual table as if nothing had changed. She looked up when he approached, and for the first time in months, he saw her without any masks. The girl who had confessed her love on the rooftop was gone, replaced by someone who radiated the kind of quiet power that came from surviving the unsurvivable. "How long have you known?" he asked, his voice barely controlled. She closed her laptop with deliberate precision, the sound echoing in the suddenly quiet library. Students whispered and stared from nearby tables, phones out, recording what would probably become viral content within hours. "Known what?" Her voice was calm, professional, the tone of someone conducting a business meeting. "That you were exactly the kind of man who would reject someone based on their perceived social status? I've known that since the day we met." The words hit him like slaps, each one precisely calculated to wound. "That's not—" "You lied to me. About everything. Your name, your background, your entire identity." "Did I?" She tilted her head, studying him with the clinical interest of a scientist examining a specimen. "I told you I believed in justice. I told you some systems deserved to burn. I told you exactly who I was. You just chose not to listen." Taehyun sank into the chair across from her, his world reshaping itself around this new reality. "The ethics project, the interviews with workers who'd been hurt by corporate policies. You were gathering evidence. Among other things." She stood, gathering her materials with movements that spoke of breeding and power he had somehow missed before. "I was also testing whether you were capable of genuine empathy or just performing concern to impress a girl you thought was beneath you." "And your conclusion?" For the first time, her composure cracked slightly, letting him glimpse something that might have been disappointment. You failed spectacularly. The confrontation was interrupted by the arrival of campus security, followed by a small army of reporters who had somehow breached the building's defenses. Yuna moved through the chaos with practiced ease, her security team, when had she acquired a security team, creating a protective barrier as she walked toward the exit. "Miss So," a reporter shouted above the crowd, "how long have you been planning your father's downfall?" She paused at the library doors, turning back to address the cameras with the poise of someone born to command attention. "Justice isn't something you plan," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the packed room. "It's something you choose, every day, even when it costs you everything you thought you wanted." Her eyes found Taehyun's across the crowd, and for a moment, he saw the girl who had loved him flickering behind the heiress's mask. Then she was gone, swept away by security and circumstances, leaving him alone with the wreckage of everything he thought he knew. Meanwhile, Minju faced her own reckoning in her family's Gangnam penthouse. The shipping manifests spread across her father's desk told a story she had been trying to ignore for weeks. Her family's company had been transporting ESO, the oil industry's illegal weapons shipments, buried among legitimate cargo and protected by bribes that reached into every level of government. "How long?" she asked her father, her voice steady despite the way her hands shook. Park Cholman looked older than his 60 years, his face gray with the knowledge of inevitable consequences. "Since before you were born. Seo Jin-hwan wasn't just a business partner, he was family. Your mother's cousin." The revelation hit like a physical blow. "We're related to her?" "Distantly, but blood is blood, Minju-ya. When this all comes out..." He gestured at the documents, at the evidence that would destroy 3 generations of careful reputation building. "We'll be lucky if we avoid prison." Minju thought about Yuna, Kim Mirai, sitting in ethics class, asking questions about supply chain accountability that now felt like accusations. Had she known then? Had every conversation been a test, every shared moment a form of judgment? "There's only one choice," she said finally, her voice carrying the steel that had made her family's fortune. "We cooperate fully with the investigation. We provide evidence, testify truthfully, and hope that our assistance earns us mercy." "That's tantamount to suicide," her father protested. "No," Minju replied, thinking about the girl who had sat quietly in the back of classrooms, who had seen through their pretenses from the beginning. "Suicide would be trying to fight someone who spent 5 years planning our destruction. This is survival." The phone call came that evening, Yuna's voice professional and emotionless. "I assume you've seen the news?" "All of it," Minju confirmed, standing on her balcony overlooking the Han River. "My family's involvement, the shipping records, everything." "And?" "We're prepared to cooperate fully with the investigation. Complete transparency, full testimony, whatever the prosecutors need." A long pause. "Why?" The question carried weight beyond its simple syllables. Minju closed her eyes, thinking about all the moments she had dismissed Yuna's insights, all the times she had assumed intelligence was the same as belonging. "Because you were right," she said finally. "About the system, about justice, about the cost of complicity. I spent so long thinking I was better than you because I understood how the world worked. I never stopped to ask whether that world deserved to exist." When Yuna spoke again, her voice held something that might have been surprise. "I didn't expect you to see it that way. I didn't expect you to be Seo Yuna. I suppose we're both full of surprises." Another pause then. "Your cooperation will be noted in our recommendations to the prosecutors. Your family's testimony could help expose the full network." "And us? You and me?" Yuna's laugh was soft and bitter. "I don't know what we are anymore, Minju. Everything we built was based on lies." "Not everything," Minju said quietly. "The respect was real. The recognition of equals. I may not have known your name, but I knew your mind." The call ended without resolution. But that night, Minju made a decision that would define the rest of her life. She would stand with Yuna, not as penance, but as partnership. If the old world was burning, she would help build whatever came next. 3 months later, Yuna stood in the penthouse office of the restructured Seo Corporation, soul spread beneath her like a sea, Oncord Kingdom. The criminal network was dismantled, her father and his associates facing decades in prison, and she controlled assets worth more than most countries' GDP. She should have felt triumphant. Instead, she felt hollow, as if victory had cost her something essential that she couldn't name. The girl who had loved Kim Tae-hyun was truly dead now, and in her place was someone who had everything except the one thing she had discovered she wanted most, the possibility of being loved for who she really was. "You asked how long I've known who you really are," she whispered to her reflection in the floor-to-ceiling windows. "I've known since the day we met. The question is, do you know who I am now?" But the only answer was the city's glittering silence, beautiful and cold and utterly alone. The community service center in Gangbuk smelled like industrial disinfectant and broken dreams. Taehyun pulled on rubber gloves with hands that had never done manual labor, trying not to think about how far he had fallen from the penthouse offices where he once believed he belonged. 6 months of court-mandated service at a legal aid clinic, punishment for his family's complicity in the CO Industries scandal, had stripped away every comfortable illusion about his place in the world. "You're the Kim boy," said Mrs. Park, a 70-year-old woman whose factory injury case had been buried in corporate bureaucracy for 3 years. "Your family's company bought the equipment that crushed my husband's leg. You here to tell me it wasn't your fault?" Taehyun looked into her eyes, seeing a pain that couldn't be solved with money or connections, and felt something fundamental shift inside his chest. "No, ma'am. I'm here to help you file an appeal, and to learn what I should have known years ago." The legal aid office became his education in the real cost of privilege. Every case told the same story: workers injured by cost-cutting measures, families bankrupted by medical bills, whistleblowers fired and blacklisted for speaking truth to power. The system he had been born to inherit wasn't just flawed, it was designed to crush people like Mrs. Park while protecting people like him. "You're different than I expected," said Attorney Shin, the overworked public defender who supervised his service. "Most chaebols do their community service at art museums or charity galas. You actually show up and do the work." "Maybe because I finally understand what the work is," Taehyun replied, staying late to organize case files that would otherwise be lost in bureaucratic limbo. "All those years, I thought I was being prepared to lead. I was really being prepared to exploit." Across the city, Yuna sat in Dr. Han's office, staring at the tissue box that had become her weekly nemesis. 6 months of therapy had taught her to name the shadows that haunted her sleep: PTSD, survivor's guilt, the complex trauma of loving someone who had tried to kill you. "Tell me about the nightmares," Dr. Han said, her voice gentle but persistent. "It's always the same car," Yuna whispered. "Rain on the windshield, my mother's hand going limp. Then I'm 17 again and he's explaining why she had to die. For the family, for the business, for the greater good of an empire built on blood." "And how do you feel when you wake up?" "Angry. But also..." She paused, searching for words that wouldn't make her sound weak. "Guilty. For surviving when she didn't. For destroying everything she died trying to expose. For wondering if I've become exactly like him." Dr. Han leaned forward, her expression compassionate but challenging. "Do you think your father would have spent 5 years gathering evidence to expose his own crimes?" "No. He would have found a way to profit from them." "Then perhaps you're more your mother's daughter than you realize." The courtroom testimony came 8 months later, on a gray November morning when Seoul's air tasted like ashes and unfulfilled promises. Yuna sat in the witness box, facing the man who had shaped every moment of her life, first as beloved father, then as architect of her mother's murder, finally as the enemy she had dedicated herself to destroying. Seo Jin-hwan looked older, prison having carved new lines around his eyes, but his voice still carried the authority that had once made her believe he could move mountains. "My daughter is traumatized, Your Honor," he said during cross-examination, his tone carrying just the right note of paternal concern. "The accident damaged her memory, created false narratives to cope with survivor's guilt. She needs treatment, not revenge. Yuna felt familiar hands tighten around her throat, the invisible chains of gaslighting that had made her question her own sanity for years. But Dr. Han's voice echoed in her mind. Your truth doesn't need his permission to exist. I remember everything, she said, her voice carrying clearly across the packed courtroom. The weapons shipments disguised as construction equipment, the bribes to military officials, the journalists who asked too many questions and disappeared. And I remember you telling my mother that whistleblowers were cancer cells that needed to be cut out. Yunaya, her father said, using the pet name like a weapon. You're sick. Let me help you. I am sick, she interrupted, standing despite the prosecutor's gesture to remain seated. I'm sick of pretending your love was real when it was just another form of control. I'm sick of carrying shame for surviving when you wanted me dead. And I'm sick of letting you define what truth means. The silence that followed felt like a held breath, like the moment before lightning strikes. When she sat back down, her hands were steady for the first time in months. It was after the testimony, in the courthouse hallway crowded with reporters and spectators, that she saw him. Taehyun stood near the back of the crowd, no longer the polished prince she remembered, but someone who looked like he had been taken apart and reassembled with different priorities. I didn't expect to see you here, she said when he approached, her voice carefully neutral. I couldn't stay away. After everything that happened, everything I failed to understand. He ran a hand through hair that needed cutting, a small sign of how much his world had changed. I needed to witness your courage, even if I had no right to it. They walked in silence to a coffee shop near the courthouse, the kind of place where legal aid lawyers grabbed quick meals, between impossible cases. The conversation that followed felt like performing surgery without anesthesia, necessary but excruciating. I can't undo the man I was, Yuna, he said, staring at his untouched coffee. But I can prove who I'm becoming. Every day, for as long as it takes. She studied his face, looking for traces of the entitled boy who had broken her heart with casual cruelty. Instead, she saw something she recognized. The hollow exhaustion of someone who had lost everything and was trying to rebuild from rubble. Prove it to yourself first, she replied. I'm done being anyone's redemption story. But something had shifted between them, some possibility that hadn't existed when they were playing roles in each other's expectations. 3 months later, when the CO Justice Foundation needed legal consultants for their first major case, Yuna found herself calling his number. We're representing factory workers whose safety equipment was made with substandard materials, she said without preamble. The corporate lawyers will try to bury them in technicalities. I need someone who understands how these systems really work. Why me? His voice carried genuine confusion. There are lawyers with more experience, better reputations. Because you know how privilege thinks. You know which arguments will appeal to judges who've never missed a meal, which language will make corporate executives uncomfortable. She paused, then added quietly, and because I trust that you won't try to save me while we're trying to save them. The case took 6 months to resolve, bringing them together in conference rooms and courtrooms where they fought for people whose names had never appeared in society pages. Yuna watched Taehyun work with the focused intensity of someone trying to balance cosmic scales, staying late to review testimonies, driving to Busan to interview witnesses personally. You don't have to prove anything to me, she told him one evening as they prepared opening arguments in her foundation office. Yes, I do, he replied without looking up from his notes. But more than that, I have to prove it to Mrs. Park, and to every person our families hurt while we were living in our glass towers. Minju's friendship had been the surprise of the year. What began as guilt-driven cooperation evolved into genuine partnership as she used her business connections to fund the foundation's work. Her own family's shipping company had been restructured into an ethical enterprise, becoming a model for how corporate responsibility could coexist with profitability. I keep waiting for you to forgive me, Minju said during one of their monthly dinners at a small restaurant in Itaewon. For what? Yuna asked, genuinely puzzled. For not seeing you, for dismissing your ideas, for being part of the system that hurt you. Yuna set down her chopsticks, studying her former rival who had become something approaching a sister. I don't need to forgive you for being raised in privilege any more than you need to forgive me for being raised in trauma. We just have to choose what we do with what we learned. The Foundation's first. To major victory came 18 months after its founding, a class action settlement that provided medical care and compensation to 300 workers injured by defective equipment. Standing in the courthouse where she had once testified against her father, Yuna felt something she hadn't experienced in years. The possibility that pain could be transformed into purpose. We did it, Taehyun said as they watched the families celebrate their victory. We did something, Yuna corrected. This is one case, one small justice in an ocean of injustice. The real work is just beginning. But when she looked at him, really looked, she saw someone who had learned the same lesson that had taken her years to accept. Redemption wasn't a destination, but a daily choice. And love wasn't about being saved, but about choosing to save each other, one day at a time. The wedding was everything their families would have hated. 30 guests in Yuna's therapist's garden, vows written in their own words, no mention of mergers or dynasties or the careful political calculations that had once governed their lives. Yuna wore her mother's simple silver ring and a dress that cost less than the flowers at most chaebol weddings. Taehyun's suit was the same one he'd worn to court hearings, cleaned and pressed, but carrying the weight of everything they had survived together. I promised to love you without trying to fix you, he said, his voice steady despite the tears that had surprised them both. To build something new instead of inheriting something broken. To choose us, every day, even when it's difficult. Yuna looked at the man who had rejected her as Kim Mire and chosen her as Seo Yuna, who had learned to see her strength instead of fearing it. I promise to trust you with my truth, even the parts that still scare me, to let you love me without needing to deserve it, to build a life together that honors what we've lost and creates what we've dreamed. Mrs. Park cried during the ceremony, her weathered hands clasped together as she watched the chaebol boy who had learned to fight for justice marry the heiress who had never stopped believing in it. Minju served as maid of honor, her own transformation from rival to sister complete in ways none of them could have imagined 5 years earlier. The reception was held in the Foundation's offices, where case files and legal briefs created a backdrop that spoke to their shared priorities. Detective Park, now retired and serving as the Foundation's security consultant, raised a toast with cheap champagne and expensive sentiment. To the couple who proved that sometimes the best revenge is building something beautiful from the ashes of what tried to destroy you. But even happiness couldn't exist in isolation from their past. 3 months after the wedding, as Yuna reviewed funding applications in their shared home office, her assistant knocked with news that made her blood freeze. Your father's requested a meeting. He says he has information about remaining network assets that could help your cases. Seo Jinhwan looked smaller in his prison uniform, his authority diminished, but not entirely gone. The visiting room at Seoul Detention Center felt like a stage set for their final confrontate. Harsh fluorescent lights casting shadows that reminded Yuna of childhood nightmares. My daughter, he said, his voice carrying the same manipulative warmth that had once made her feel guilty for questioning him. Marriage suits you. You look settled. What do you want? She asked, keeping her voice flat and professional. To help, of course. The Foundation's work is admirable, if naive. There are assets you haven't found, accounts that could fund your idealistic crusade for decades. Yuna studied his face, looking for the trap she knew existed beneath every offer of cooperation. And in exchange? Visitation rights. The chance to know my grandchildren when they come. The possibility of redemption, even for someone like me. The offer hung between them like poisoned fruit, tempting and toxic in equal measure. Yuna thought about the cases they could take with unlimited funding, the workers they could help, the systemic changes they could force with enough resources. No, she said finally. We'll find our own funding, build our own legacy. You don't get to be part of what we're creating. Her father's mask slipped for a moment, showing the rage that had always lurked beneath his paternal performance. You'll fail without me. You're too idealistic, too naive about how power really works. Maybe, Yuna interrupted, standing to leave. But our failures will be our own, and our successes won't be built on your blood money. The argument with Taehyun came 6 months later, their first real fight as married partners. The disagreement centered on a case involving a tech company whose AI algorithms had discriminated against job applicants based on economic background, a lawsuit that would require them to challenge some of their foundation's major donors. "We can't bite every hand that feeds us," Taehyun said, his voice tight with frustration as they worked late in their kitchen, case files spread across the dining table like battle plans. "Park Industries funds half our legal aid program. If we sue them, we lose that support. And if we don't sue them, we lose our integrity," Yuna replied, her own temper flaring. "This is exactly the kind of compromise that created the system we're fighting against. I'm not asking you to compromise your principles. I'm asking you to be strategic about which battles we can win. That's what my father always said. Pick your battles. Work within the system. Incremental change is better than no change at all." She slammed her laptop shut, the sound echoing through their apartment like a gunshot. "I didn't destroy everything I knew to become a more palatable version of what I was running from." The silence that followed felt dangerous, loaded with all the ways they were still learning to be married people instead of individual survivors. Taehyun sat back in his chair, studying her with the careful attention he had learned to pay to things that mattered. "You're right," he said finally. "I'm sorry. Old habits, old fears about what happens when you challenge power directly." "And I'm sorry for comparing you to my father," Yuna replied, her anger dissolving into something more complex. "That was unfair. You've proven who you are 1,000 times over." They took the case, lost 2 major donors, and won a settlement that changed industry hiring practices across the sectors. The victory felt different than their early wins, more costly, but also more meaningful, proof that their marriage could survive disagreement and emerge stronger. 5 years later, they stood in the same courthouse where Yuna had once testified against her father, watching a judge sentence the last members of his criminal network to prison terms that would keep them locked away for decades. The CO Justice Foundation had grown from a small legal aid clinic to a national organization that had changed corporate accountability laws and helped hundreds of families find justice. "We did it," Taehyun said, echoing his words from their first victory, but with deeper understanding of what success meant. "We did something," Yuna corrected, just as she had years earlier. "But there's always more work to do." They walked home through Seoul's twilight streets, past the neon signs and glass towers that had once represented everything they were supposed to inherit. Now they looked like just another part of the city, beautiful and flawed and constantly changing, like everything worth loving. "Do you ever regret it?" Taehyun asked as they stopped at a red light, his question carrying the weight of everything they had chosen and everything they had given up. "All of it?" Yuna considered the question seriously, thinking about the girl who had died in a car accident 5 years ago, the woman who had emerged from that wreckage, the life they had built from the ruins of their separate disasters. "Which part?" she replied. "Destroying my father? Trusting you? Or choosing the harder path every single time?" "All of it." She looked at her husband, still surprising her after all these years with his capacity for growth, his willingness to be changed by love, and felt the familiar mixture of gratitude and determination that had carried her through every impossible choice. "Ask me again in 10 years, she said, taking his hand as the light changed and they walked toward home together. "When we know how the story actually ends. But today I choose to build something worth defending." Above them, Seoul's skyline glittered with the lights of 8 million people living their own complicated stories of love and loss and second chances. And somewhere in that vast tapestry of human possibility, 2 people who had learned to love each other's scars walked toward a future they were finally brave enough to build together. This is what happens when the underestimated rise up and take back their power. Pure satisfaction. Hit subscribe if you're obsessed with stories where the victims become the victors, and comment on your favorite moment from Yuna's revenge journey.